Beyond the Headlines is underwritten with the generous support of the D.A. Collins family of companies. For more than 65 years, the D.A. Collins family of companies have provided construction, environmental, and real estate services for the public and private sectors. The D.A. Collins family of companies.
Welcome to Beyond the Headlines. I'm Michael Lenz. The New York State Assembly has wrapped up its legislative session for the summer. I'll talk with Assemblywoman Carrie Woerner, representing the 113th District, about some of the legislation she's passed, as well as other issues facing our district when we come back. Welcome back to Beyond the Headlines. I'm joined by Assemblywoman Carrie Woerner, representing the 113th Assembly District. This is part two of our discussion about some of the legislative issues that she's been working on and some of the issues that are impacting her legislative district. Assemblywoman Woerner, when we last spoke, we were talking about downtown revitalization in some of our smaller urban areas.
Right.
We talk about Saratoga Springs a lot because it is one of the primary urban centers within your legislative district. But there's a lot of other small towns out there that aren't doing quite as well, and you've been taking some steps to try to help revitalize them. And can we talk about some more specific examples of some of the things you've been doing with some of those communities?
Absolutely. So let's talk about Hudson Falls, which is the village in Kingsbury. And in Hudson Falls, they've got it's not dissimilar to Saratoga Springs in that it has a very historic downtown with beautiful facades, a gorgeous park in the center of it, but not a lot of economic activity. And so one of the things I've been able to do is bring some capital to help with the restoration of the Strand Theater. There's an old Strand Theater there, the Hudson River Music Hall, run by a tremendous guy named Jonathan Newell, who I think has been on a Look TV show to talk about this. They discovered in the town hall the remnants of the Strand Theater, and they've been excavating it and bringing it back to life. There's now a new coffee shop in Hudson Falls, and it's really a center for performing arts in Washington County. Just a great project. In addition to that, we have the old courthouse, which was built by the same architect that did the Troy Music Hall. It's got wonderful acoustics, prominent building. The village has purchased it. They're going to turn it into a community center. They've got all kinds of plans for that building, and again, able to bring some capital dollars to help them with the restoration of that building. There's another privately owned building, so again, now bringing private dollars to the table. Privately owned building, the Masonic Temple, that's going to be turned into housing and retail. They received a CFA grant to do the building restoration. It is being administered by SHPO, so it'll be done according to preservation standards, which we know is part of what has been Saratoga's success, preserving the historic buildings. So all of these different activities happening in Hudson Falls, I think, are going to be the germ that grows the commercial district in that community. Fort Edward, down the road from Hudson Falls, we've been working on helping to recruit CRRC, which is the China Rail Company that's bidding on the new MTA rail cars. They are really excited about the old dewatering site, which is where GE set up their facility to handle the PCB remediation. That's been shut down now. That site is empty. The fact that the site is empty is really impacting the local tax base.
Sure.
Bringing a new tenant like CRRC that would do the construction of the rail cars as well as testing on the rail line, not just the MTA cars, but all the other ones that they build around the country, would create lots of good paying local jobs. So we're working hard to find new tenants for some of these old industrial sites, as well as helping to bring some state dollars to leverage private dollars to redevelop the downtown communities in Hudson Falls.
That's wonderful. I know anytime you take a drive outside of Saratoga Springs, you get into, there are parts of our own area and your own legislative district that would rival the most beautiful areas in Vermont, for example.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
it's amazing when you get out into those rolling hills, and I think about, New York City is obviously such a huge global urban center, and a lot of people from New York City, we see customers at the pharmacy coming up saying, we have our home in Hudson, New York, which is, somewhere between Saratoga
Right.
Springs and New York City. And again, oftentimes I think people lose sight of the fact that we have beautiful, beautiful areas around Saratoga Springs that could be, if you can revitalize some of those urban centers there to make that a focal point, it's a great place for people to potentially have second homes, for businesses to relocate, as you said.
Absolutely. I feel very blessed to represent what I think is probably the most beautiful part of New York State. And there is so much potential here. Saratoga County is the only county north of New York City that's growing. And there's a lot of years of planning and execution of those plans that has led to this. And what we see is that for example, the Global Foundries investment in Malta, those 3,000 employees are spread out across Saratoga, Washington, and Warren County. And so I can find in Hudson Falls new residents who have selected Hudson Falls as the community they want to live in. They work down in Malta, but they love the community of Hudson Falls. They love the trails that connect it to Lake George. They like the school district. They like the neighborhoods that are there. They're bringing new energy to the community. They're supporting a farmer's market up there. They're growing the library. They're supporting the efforts to redevelop the downtown. And that new energy, combined with those sort of the people who have been holding the flame for a long time, is really stimulating a lot of the reinvestment and redevelopment in these communities. And I'm happy to be able to help bring some additional state resources to bear to make that process just a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think people forget that your district is quite rural. I mean, we certainly have some urban centers, but a lot of rural parts to the 113th. Let's talk fiber. I know you're on your way to the fiber tour.
Well, not quite the fiber tour. We are under the heading of economic development. Hemp as a crop represents just a tremendous opportunity in Washington County and in Saratoga County. The fiber industry has been booming. We've got the Battenkill Fiber Mill processes fiber fleeces from farms all across this region, and we're really developing a great reputation in Washington and Saratoga County for high quality fiber. Hemp is the next great opportunity space for us. So we're bringing in a processor who's looking to expand into New York State from Kentucky, hoping that he will set up shop here to process hemp and combine that with the fiber processing we already have to really build a solid industry for fiber here in Washington and Saratoga
I want to talk a little bit more about that after a break, because he had a really interesting story about kind of how that all came together. So let's take a quick break and we'll talk about that some more.
All right.
Okay, we'll be right back in just a minute. And welcome back to part two on Beyond the Headlines of my conversation with Assemblywoman Carrie Woerner, representing the 113th Legislative District. We've been talking a little bit about fiber and hemp and the impact that it has on our agricultural community out here in your legislative district. Before the break, you mentioned that there is a processing that's going on here in our local area to process hemp into fiber. So tell us kind of the story behind that.
So we're still hoping that we're going to get the processor to process the hemp. So let me just set a little bit of a context. The governor has said that we will have 20,000 planted acres of hemp by 2020. Today we have 2,000 planted acres of hemp. So we've got a big jump to get to 20,000 acres. There's a number of farmers in this area who have expressed an interest in being part of that growth to the 20,000 acres. Now, hemp by itself needs a processor to turn it into a useful product. We have an opportunity here that has come about to bring that processor here. And just to give you a little sense of how that happened, I was on the fiber tour last spring, and I was speaking to Mary Jean Packer, who's the CEO of Battenkill Fibers. And I said to her, Mary Jean, you process alpaca, you process sheep fleeces. What would it take to process hemp into a spun fiber? She said, well, I don't know, but I'll find out. She came to me early in the summer and she said, I figured it out. I know how we can do this. And in addition to that, I found a company in Kentucky that wants to expand into New York State. And I want you to call him and talk to him about coming here. And so he is here today from Kentucky, looking at Washington County as a potential place to expand his business to process the hemp grown in New York State. So I'm very excited about this opportunity, and I am hopeful that we will be able to persuade him that Washington County is the right spot for him to set up shop.
Isn't it amazing what we can do in our agricultural community out here?
It's tremendous. You know, ag is the largest industry in New York State. It's the largest industry in Saratoga County and in Washington County. I think people miss that sometimes, and but it's an industry that we continually have to support, and bringing. Opening up opportunities for new crops is something that is key, and I give the governor a lot of props for his foresight in identifying these new crops that we can grow in New York State that will really expand the value of our ag industry, and hemp is one of them. Hops and malted barley and the craft beer industry is another one that he's really championed, and that we're seeing really take root in our local region, and it's attracting new younger farmers to the industry. It's all positive.
Let's talk about that, because we talked about that a little bit off camera about the craft brewing industry and how that's impacting the agricultural community here.
Absolutely, it's completely taken root here in Saratoga and Washington counties. And just last week, R.S. Taylor opened their second tasting room. They're located in Argyle. They opened a tasting room here in Saratoga Springs. We've got our Argyle Brewing in Greenwich that has opened a second tasting room in Cambridge. We have Druthers. You know, the Davidson brothers up in Glens Falls. Craft beverages are a big deal, and it's interesting how the supply chain develops. So we have hops growers, we have malted barley growers, we have a hops processor. So we have some young entrepreneurs who decided that they spotted an opportunity to be the processor for hops, to take them. Hops have like a 3-week window to harvest them, dry them, get them processed and packaged. They spotted that opportunity. They made the investment. We've got a hops processor. We've got a young woman in Moreau who's going to create a grain hub in Moreau so that they can store the grains, and brewers can come and pick out the small batch grains that they need. It's a tremendous supply chain. The machine tool industry is kind of a niche industry sector that we actually dominate here in Washington County and in Saratoga County. We don't hear much about that, but it is a niche. And they are starting to now make the equipment for these small breweries. So we have, it's an industry that has really expanded. And I'm totally excited about the opportunity space that this represents for new young farmers to get started, businesses to grow. It's a great time in our community because of all of these new ag initiatives that are going on.
And we see so much on the national level and around the world, the Amazon, experience that we're all seeing now. And I think there's a little bit of a pushback in terms of my sense is that people want to have that locally made or regionally made product. Right. And even within the spirits industry, we're seeing distilleries that are opening up in regional and local areas where 5-6 years ago it was all the big players, and people want that experience. They want, not only are entrepreneurs interested in doing that, in niching down and creating their own brand within that industry, but consumers, me being one, enjoy that. You know, you want to be able to support your local business, but also oftentimes it adds a whole nother layer to the enjoyment process.
Absolutely.
Because it's really good, and it's local.
It's really good, it's local, and you probably got to know the person who made it. So it just is, you feel, you're supporting the guy down the street and their business. And you're a small business person in Saratoga Springs, and you know how that works.
Right.
People like to come into your business because they know you and they're your neighbor, and they want to support their neighbor. And I think that this buy local trend is one that I think is really here to stay.
Yeah.
And it's tremendous to see, and I'm excited. I'm excited to get hemp underway.
Absolutely. As an entrepreneur, as you said, I love to see that kind of initiative out there. It's wonderful. So we have another issue that we want to talk about that's much more serious, and I know you're working with local communities to help that, and that's the opioid crisis. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll finish up with that.
Great.
Okay. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Beyond the Headlines. Continuing our conversation with Assemblywoman Carrie Woerner, the second part of our conversation. Carrie, we've been talking about a lot of wonderful, positive things that are happening in your legislative district. One of the things that we're seeing at the local level, and really across the country, is the rise in opioid use. And it really has become a crisis, but it's starting to, it has come to our backyard. So tell us a little bit about that.
It's if you're on Facebook or you're reading the obituaries in the paper, just about every month you'll read one that says some young person died unexpectedly. It's code for they overdosed. The opioid epidemic is real, and it's here, and it's touching every neighborhood. It's touching people young and old, and it is something we have got to come to grips with. And there's a lot of elements to that. We've got a pretty vibrant recovery community in Saratoga County through the Prevention Council, and in Washington County through the Prevention Council. A number of our churches are involved in recovery community building, and that's a wonderful thing. We have law enforcement here that is, I think, very insightful in the way they are approaching this. Using alternative sentencing to try to direct people who are addicts into treatment rather than putting them in jail, going hard against the dealers and trying to get the supply off the street. I spent some time with Sheriff Zerlo a couple of weeks ago on this very topic. We were able to, in Washington County, we're able to get the Fort Edward Police Department funds for a new police car that will help with drug interdiction. We've gotten grants for both the recovery community as well as our alternative sentencing because we want to support all of these efforts. It's real and it's here. We have to come to grips with it. Coming up in October, Senator Marchione and I are going to do an interfaith breakfast, bringing together the faith community to talk about what are best practices, how can we all be involved in this, what are some of the policy changes that the faith community can identify that can help us really come to grips with this, to support families who have loved ones that are addicted, to support people who are seeking recovery, to help stop the addiction from starting to begin with. So I'm looking forward to working with the senator on identifying some of those. I will be introducing legislation next session that hopefully will make it easier for our local hospitals who don't have recovery beds to, when they need them, and they've got beds available in a different unit, to turn those into recovery beds, just to broaden the ways in which our medical community can support those who are seeking recovery. What we know is that when someone who has an opioid addiction finally makes the decision to say to their loved one, their parent, I'm ready, I can't live like this anymore, I need help, you have about 30 minutes to get them into a recovery facility. That's about how long their willpower is going to last. Mm-hmm. If you can't find them a bed in that 30 minutes, they're off. Mm-hmm. And so we need to make sure that there are facilities available in our local communities so that family members can take advantage of that moment when their loved one says, I'm ready. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to be trying to make it easier for our local hospitals. And I've been talking to the CEO of Saratoga Hospital and to Glens Falls Hospital about the desirability of this, and they're all in favor of it. That if we can make it so they can convert a bed to a recovery bed when they need it, that's going to be a real benefit in our community.
And it's an interesting point that you brought up in terms of incarceration versus treatment. Because all too often we think if you get caught with drugs, you go to jail. And that's kind of the law of the land.
Right.
And the situation with drugs like heroin, it goes across every socioeconomic class. Right. It doesn't discriminate.
Right.
And ultimately, when something like that happens, the people that are impacted by it are not only the victim of the addiction, but also their loved ones. And it seems intuitively, again, to make sense to me that not that we're condoning the use of opioids or drugs, but when it happens, to help them get over that addiction, because if they don't, more often than not, they'll die.
Exactly. And, and just on a very practical level, to detox in a jail is not the right place to detox. The sheriff has to have 24/7 monitoring on someone that is in active detox in their jail. So it's an expensive proposition for law enforcement to take that path. We need to get people into recovery. We need to get them through that process and on the path to long-term recovery. And law enforcement recognizes that as long as they haven't progressed in their addiction to where they're committing secondary crimes like stealing from strangers to feed their addiction or to fund their addiction, using the drug courts, using alternative sentencing, getting them into treatment is a better path. Because what we find is that when an addict has been arrested and they're in jail and they detox, they are more likely to overdose because they go back to using at the same level, and that creates the conditions for an overdose. So it's a complex situation. There's a lot of groups in our community, fortunately, that are trying to get their arms around it, and I'm happy to be supportive and helpful in every way I can.
Yeah, and it seems to make sense that the law enforcement focus is really on stopping that supply chain, is
Right.
getting those people that are supplying the
Exactly.
opioids.
Exactly.
Tough situation, and I'm happy to see that you're taking some steps to help curb that as best we can. It's as we said, a nationwide epidemic, and we just have to do all we can here locally to help stem the tide if we can.
Absolutely.
Been to the track yet?
I have.
Good. Any luck?
No. I've been happy to make donations.
That's usually the case, and it does go to help NYRA turn a profit. So look at it that way.
And it supports our horsemen and our horse breeders, and I'm happy to do my part.
Absolutely. Well, Assemblywoman, again, thank you so much for coming on
My pleasure.
The show, and we look forward to having you on again soon.
Thank you, Mike.
You bet. Stay with me. I'll be right back in just a few minutes to wrap things up. I want to thank Assemblywoman Carrie Woerner for joining me, and thank you for tuning in. Join me next time as we continue our conversation with the business and political leaders who are shaping the news here in Saratoga Springs and the surrounding communities. Until then, for everyone here at Look Media, I'm Michael Lenz. Thanks for spending part of your day with us.
Beyond the Headlines is underwritten with the generous support of the D.A. Collins family of companies. For more than 65 years, the D.A. Collins family of companies have provided construction, environmental, and real estate services for the public and private sectors. The D.A. Collins family of companies.
Hi, I'm Michael Lenz, host of Beyond the Headlines. Now that the New York State Assembly has wrapped up its legislative session for the summer, I'll sit down and talk with Assemblywoman Carrie Woerner, representing the 113th District, about some of the legislation she's passed, as well as other issues facing our district. It'll be a great show. Hope you can join me.